welcome to the Art Workshop. I'm Christopher Epling. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We really appreciate your viewership. Today we're going to bring something a little different. We try to do things here on the Art Workshop that kind of connect either with the season or events going on around our region. And as of the recording of this episode, it is fully winter. Winter is upon us. It's here. The ice and the snow and the sleet is all coming down, but we thought, well, in, I guess, celebration of the season, because, you know, snow sometimes gets a bad rep for good reason, you know, sometimes terrible conditions with driving and all these other types of terrible things that come from this beautiful part of nature. But we want to kind of celebrate that beauty, that beautiful aspect of snow and this time of year with putting together and creating some greeting cards or small cards that you can actually duplicate, save, and copy, and then share and distribute. So we're going to be doing some greeting cards today on today's show. But before we get started actually in our content for today's activity, I want to share with you some artwork that has been sent in to us here at the Art Workshop. These are artists from here locally, some local, some a little farther away than others. This is from Caitlin No, she's 16. This is Whitley County High School. She's studying this in digital. It's a beautiful anime type drawing. Macy Ward, 12 years old, from Paintsville High. She has a very particular and interesting look to all of her work. It's just, it's amazing. Her work is very personalized. This is Renee White, also wonderful work here. She's 26, from Perry County, Kentucky. A witch themed for Halloween. It just passed up. We have Morgan Wright, 22, Pike County. Morgan is a talented anime inspiring artist. He's got some super talent. We also have Travis Johnson from Oak Hill, Kentucky. Looks like he's more into working with profiles and photorealism work, which is terribly hard to do, but beautiful work. And it's exciting to see this work being sent in because we have a lot of talent here locally, all around the region, a lot of different styles, a lot of different mediums. And remember, mediums are just what you choose to draw your work in, or create your work in. It could be acrylic, pencil, digital, doesn't matter. For today's episode, we want to tackle a couple questions that's come in too. If you have some questions that you'd like to send in to us, either questions or artwork, you can do that by just emailing me at eplingillustrations@gmail.com. We'd love to share your work or hopefully try to answer some of your questions here on the show. A couple questions that did come in for this episode. We want to take a look at these first. So this comes from Jelena McCoy from Belfry, and she asked, how do you shade with ink? Not cross-hatching, but arrange from light to dark. Now this is a real specific question. This is a question that really is something that takes time when you try to play around with different mediums to see what sort of effects you get. And ink is really hard to shade with because ink is a very fixed medium. It's a medium that is difficult to maneuver around and go from light to dark with shades. You can buy different types of markers, alcohol-based markers. Those are sort of like in your realm of the Copic or Copic or Prismacolor markers. They have a range on those from light to dark. You can use that to shade with. Or you can go a different route, and this is what I suggest. Cross-hatching is probably the easiest way to shade, and that's probably the most difficult because you have to really practice and get a grasp on how much shading you need to do or cross-hatching you need to do to show different ranges of dark to light. But they make these really neat tools. I'm going to share with you a little bit about this right now that I suggest. If you want to color or shade with ink, then you can. But you can also just purchase at any hobby store. There's a range of these graphite pencils. Now, of course, this isn't ink, but you get the effect I think you're thinking about when you're thinking of shade from light to dark. These are way less expensive than your Copic or Copic markers or Prismacolor markers. Those can range from between $3 and $4 and sometimes $5 a piece. Really expensive. But with some graphite, and you also get the ranges, and this works similar to what we discussed in the past from light to dark with graphite, from 6B, B being your darker range, H your lighter range. And you can apply to this a wet medium, so if you were to take a brush and some water, you can actually take this and you can actually start to blend it almost like a watercolor. So you can see, now this is a lighter hue or tone of the graphite, but there's also, as I said earlier, a range for going from light to dark. Now, this is not ink, no, it's not, but when I add water to this in a second, you're going to see how this works. It has a really neat effect that comes out in it because with ink, your goal, of course, is to dilute the ink down so that it's thicker in darker areas, and of course, it's a little thinner in lighter areas. So here we see a range from light to dark with our graphite. Now when we apply just a little bit of water to that, you can see how this starts to just blend in, and that's really the kind of the goal you're looking for. So when you start adding that water to this, it's almost like a watercolor graphite. You can see now how this almost resembles ink almost. It can. Of course, you want to be careful with how much water you apply to it. You can see the range of color you're getting. So, is this ink? No. This is really not answering specifically how to shade with ink, because shading with ink really requires you, as I said, to dilute the water down, similar to this. But it will look like this once you've done that successfully. And this really takes a lot of different steps in there involved with shading ink out of the way if you just invest in some of these watercolor graphite. So that's my suggestion for that, is just skip the whole problem altogether and get a set of the watercolor graphite pencils. One more question that came in today, I want to touch on this too. Now this is from David Francesco in Floyd County, Kentucky. David asked, what is Frisket and how do you use it with watercolor? That's a wonderful question, David, and that's actually tying into what we're doing today. What is Frisket? Frisket is this strange liquid mask that is used in watercolor to apply onto the paper that will not allow the watercolor to touch the paper, tooth of the paper itself. So it comes in these little bottles. You apply it just as you would, let's say, a paint. It is usually either clear or either have a milky type look to it. This is almost toned a little bit of green, but we're going to be using this Frisket today actually in our exercise, so we'll be going over how to use this properly. Usually it's sold in a set of a bottle and then an applicator. This is a dip and draw or dip and paint dipstick, and it's got a really hard surface at the top. This isn't a brush, this is actually like some sort of a type of hard plastic. And what we'll do is we'll dip this into our Frisket and then put it on the paper or on our drawing on areas that we do not want to watercolor yet. And the neat thing about how this works is after the rest of your watercolor dries, you go back over it and rub this off, and the white of the paper will be there underneath. You will not have any color. So areas that you want to keep white, do not want to apply watercolor to, or you want to go back and add more color later, Frisket is used in watercolor in that way. And we're going to touch on that today and kind of go over that a little bit in today's activity. Now for today's activity, as I said earlier, we're going to be working with greeting cards. Now I like to make my own greeting card when I have time. I haven't done it this year, but I guess we do it together today. What you can do with these is after we're finished, you can take those, you can photocopy them. You can also scan those into the computer and you can make copies. Take it to your local copy store. You know, there's different options here locally that you can actually get some of these printed up. And then on the back, you can write whatever message you want, put an address on there and a return address, and you almost make like a small postcard that you created yourself. And we're going to set up our paper. This is watercolor paper that I have here. It's a pretty big sheet of it. But we're going to be taking this watercolor paper and we're going to be using painter's tape, and we're going to be masking off 4 areas here. We're going to do 4 cards at once today. And then you could take these to maximize your money and maximize what you get out of your money. You could take this entire sheet then to the copying store and you can have 4 cards per 1 sheet of paper that you copy. Okay? So let's get started. So you're going to need some watercolor paper. Watercolor is really, takes a lot out of the tooth of the paper, so when you need something a little durable. And that's what we have here. We have this nice sturdy piece of watercolor paper. And first thing that you're going to want to do though is draw out your edges of where you're going to be putting your tape down. I want to make 4 cards on this piece of paper. So in order to do that effectively, what I want to do is mark off where, just put a small check on kind of where your borders will be. And I'm going to just put a small little check mark here to see about where I want to mark it off. The neat thing about tape is that you don't really need to, you can get a straight line just by watching and being careful on how you apply it down. And that's what we're doing here. We're going to put it down. Don't do it press down too hard on the edges, because you want to be able to lift this up at the end. And so that's important. But that's what I'm doing now. It's masking off the area of where my cards will be. and I think we may do 4 today. Just make a nice square, and we'll see how this turns out. So we'll do 1 down the middle. Let's see, 1 across the edge. There we go, like this. Sort of in the middle here. Now again, I'm just eyeballing this. If you wanted to take more time, you could use a ruler and mask this off. And the neat thing about using this painter's tape too is that the watercolor, of course, will not go underneath where you have the tape. And at the end of this, when we lift this up, we should have a nice edge around our watercolor greeting cards that almost give us a border without having to apply a border on there ourselves. So we're going to look about right here. I think what we'll do is, these are going to be more wide than they are tall. Of course, most greeting cards are more tall than they are wide. Of course, you don't really have to stick to that. You can do landscape or portrait. You can flip that over, and on the back you have your artwork. So you could do a landscape type scene, or you could do a more traditional card where you're standing more portrait than you are landscape. Just masking all these off. So now I should have 4 boxes here at the end that will serve as our cards. And I'm sure this is not perfectly straight, but that's okay. Like I said, you at home later on, if you want to do this, you can take this and get really, really accurate with it with a ruler. So now that I have 4 sections that I'm going to be drawing I want to actually go in now and draw a small scene in each one of these. I don't want to take too much time up though. I don't want to try to draw something that's perfect, that is, you know, a manicured type drawing. Watercolor is very loose. Most of the time it's very, you know, fun to play around with. You use your colors more in a way that just kind of applies to the paper in a way that looks really loose, not really over-processed. So I'm drawing a few fence posts here in this scene. I'll push down a little harder so you can see it. So there's one fence post, and I'll put another one here. Just draw these tall rectangles going off into sort of a line or a row. And the idea is to have this look like a winter scene. So here's 4 fence posts. We can attach a little line here and going all through these to maybe resemble barbed wire. So we have 2 lines. So we have here. Now when you're watercoloring snow, of course snow is white, so we are in good shape when it comes to needing and having a lot of white surface. Now I'm going to add a tree, and I'm just making these jagged lines. This is going to be a pine tree. So just draw some of these jagged shapes that kind of look like an egg, forms an egg almost at the end. Our snow or the hill will actually go up this way and down towards the back like this. So we have a line here that makes up where our snow bank is. I may put maybe another tree here. This one is actually lost all of its leaves. So I'm just going to draw some lines coming out from it like this to resemble a tree that's lost its leaves. And in the background we could actually put some more of these shapes that we'll color in later. And this will be more green pine tree. Okay, so that's one scene we have. Simple fence posts, some trees in the background. Let's move over to the next scene. In this one, what we're going to do is we're going to take our snow bank, is going to go up and then down. So we're going to be looking up at this. And we're going to put a tree right here. So just draw 2 lines coming up and then branch off with it, making the limbs of the tree are just straight lines. They're not really straight, but put some curves and bends in there. You know, most trees, when you see them after they've lost their leaves, the limbs are pretty chaotic. There's not a lot of straight lines in nature, but there's some. So we had this tree here, and then at the base of this, let's put some of this grass that is dyed out, but it's still pushing through the snow. Above our line here, the horizon line, it says the hill, we're going to put some more of this green, or dead grass, I mean. And let's add another tree off here in the distance. So our goal is to sketch this out real loose, just have something that we can watercolor. Once we have all these elements drawn, we can go back again at this point now, and we can start to put the watercolor in after we've drawn it out. Down here at the bottom, I want to do another scene, another winter scene. I may bring the hill coming down. I like to do different types of slopes to the ground, just to add some variation. This was going to be a pine here. It's going to have some leaves or limbs that are holding some pine needles. So this is going to be a very dark green with some light snow kind of on the limbs itself. so we don't want to have this colored in too much. And then add some more of the trees that have lost their leaves in the background. I think these are called deciduous trees. And then of course you have your pines. Your deciduous trees, and those of you that know the proper term for this, I might be butchering it, are trees that I think that lose their leaves in winter. And then of course your pine trees that are hold the needles year round, right? So we have this kind of a scene here of a snow bank coming down, and then one more. For this one, I want to put some more pine. I want to do some of these taller, more typical what you think of when you think of a pine tree with a lot of sharp edges. So we'll have one of those right here and actually do a few more off into the distance, because this will actually help us to break up our snow bank more, and we'll actually put another kind of a rolling bank here in the background, and it gives us an opportunity now to put some more trees, some happy trees, as Bob Ross would say. Let's put a lot of them. Let's actually put a few more. I want this to be like look like you're looking out into this very deep and vast wintry landscape of a pine forest. So there we go. All right, so we have 4 scenes now that we've scribbled out. That's what we need. We're not overthinking this too much. I'm going to take some watercolor now. I'm going to pull out this tray of watercolor cakes. You're going to notice that I'm going to lay it down over here, blocking out these 2 first. I'm going to be working from this side. We don't have a lot of time in the show to cover everything. So what I'm going to do now is just use this mister. This will help get all my cakes wet. These are watercolor cakes. I just spray it all over there, get them all nice and moist like that. And I'm going to pull a aqua brush, which is one of these that I used earlier with the graphite. And that's what I'm going to be using. I use one with a thicker brush to actually go over and work in my landscape. But before we start speeding through the actual painting of this, I'm going to show you how to use the frisket. So the frisket comes with this applicator, which is just sort of a little type of nozzle that you can suck up some and pour it out if you need to. We're not going to pour any out. We're going to go straight from the bottle. I'm going to use my dipstick. That's literally what's called a dipstick. You're going to get some at the end, and wherever you want the watercolor to not be applied, this is where you're going to put your frisket down. So I may want some here, of course, where the white of the snow. Now you may think to yourself, well, you want to put it all over the place, right? Because if it's snowing and you're drawing this wintry landscape, well, what's the purpose of not having everything just be white? Well, there's a lot of color that happens in nature that you don't think of when you just think of a snowy scene. If you think of early mornings, especially here lately during the recording of this episode anyway, whenever you have a bright sunny morning after a few days of snow, and if you walk out at sunrise or near sunrise, you're going to see a lot of blue tints to the snow. You may have even some purplish tints to the snow in the evening whenever sunset happens. There's a lot of different colors that pop out in nature that we don't think of. And so while I start watercoloring, you're going to see some of those colors pop out. And I want you to think about it a little differently as we go through these, okay? So I think this is enough frisket for at least some of these 2 sections here. So we'll start out on this section. I'm going to speed watercolor through both of these. Then I'm going to move over to this side, applying frisket here as well. I may go ahead and do that to give it time for it to dry, so that way when I actually get over here this part, it's going to be already dried and I can just paint over top of it. So that's all I'm doing. Just remember, if you have frisket, if you get some, you use it sparingly. You want to be kind of fast about it too. It dries really, really fast. So as you're applying it, be aware of just what areas you've covered. You don't want to get to the point where you're having to go over the frisket with more frisket, because then you can get into trouble. All right, let's go ahead now and finish up with the frisket, and then we'll jump into the speed watercolor portion of our greeting card activity. went through, we've applied watercolor to all of our small window pane here of greeting cards, and at the end of this you want to let it dry. The frisket does take a bit to dry. It looks wet though, even after it dries, and that's just how the medium works. Now, this is a really quick example on how to put together 4 sets of greeting cards, but I want to go ahead though and pull this tape off to show you the borders that is created, which should be, you can pull it all off together, it's fine, but you'll see now this masking tape has formed you a nice border around each card, but we're not finished quite yet with the art, because in order to really make this stand out is I want to go back over some of the areas where the trees extend to the edge, okay? So you can see now this makes a nice square on each one of these small little paintings, but if you go back in and you take a smaller brush this time and grab a little bit of more of the brown that I've used to create the limbs of the trees with, and you extend this on out just a little bit, and you can add pencil to it here in a second so we can actually start to make this more fully developed. But by extending these branches out just a little bit further, you can see what happens. It kind of gives a nice effect to it, that it's going off of the out of the frame of the card. And you can do this on each one, just extend it out a little bit more, so that way whenever you have these printed, you have this neat effect that's happening with these branches. And you don't have to do this on every one of them. You know, you can of course just do it on a few. If you can do it on the evergreen too, but you will have to go back and, you know, of course add more color. Now with the frisket portion of this, the frisket part, we're going to pull this off in a second, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do this without damaging your art. You do want to make sure though and let it dry, as we've talked about. That way you're for sure not going to mess up all the work you've put into this so far. And this has been a very, you know, fast example on how this works. But you can see how the limbs extend now out of the pane. They still look a little white, and the reason they look a little light, I mean, is that you need to go back then with your pencil, of course, and you know, kind of match it up to the rest of the tree. And once you do that though, these limbs should look like they're extending a little bit off or outside of the frame. And this just adds another small little kind of an effect to your drawing. And if you were to go and copy these and then turn these into like postcards / greeting cards, they make a nice sort of set. So you could set one to someone and one to another person and so on and so forth. And if you do this each year, eventually you're going to have a collection of all the different cards that you've made throughout the years, and it's really neat to look back on all those. I used to make personalized Christmas cards where I'd draw a cartoon on the front and print those up and send them out to folks, but I haven't done that in the past year or two. It's been something that, you know, with time, you know, it's really hard to do, but you can see how this kind of adds a neat little effect to it, extending out. Now, for this frisket, you want to take your finger, and you're going to see, once I start to do this, that this frisket's going to rub off. And it's going to leave a lot of blank space in here, okay? This isn't the final, you know, touch to the drawing. You can go back, even after you do this, and add more color in there to it. But you can see how it kind of just leaves this negative space. And you see, this isn't actually all the way dry yet, but that's why it's really important for you to let your watercolor dry before you go do this. But you can see how this works. So now I'm just rubbing it off with my finger. It kind of feels, it's like a wax. Actually, it's exactly what it is. So it doesn't damage the paper. As long as your watercolor is dry, you'll be okay. It pulls off, it's a sticky-like substance that dries and then turns into this kind of a waxy substance that you can just peel off with your finger. But whenever you include this on certain areas of your drawing, you can see how now it looks like the snow is appearing right behind us, right behind our art. So it's a neat little medium to use. It is a little messy at first. You know, you don't want to certainly rub it while it's still wet, because that's really going to give you some problems. But if you wait until it dries thoroughly, you can have a nice effect with your work this way. And it adds that negative space in areas where you've already painted over with watercolor, right? Now I'm working on this area up here. Now you notice these fence posts, I've applied some of the frisket to that area, and that almost looks like there's some snow that's attached to that. And if you do this in large bulks in areas, you will have to add more color later because you don't realize just exactly how much space the frisket's taking up. And it may look like someone's went in and just with a white marker and colored over your work, but the idea is not just to use this so that you don't have any watercolor in the areas that you apply it to, but the idea is also to put it in areas that you want to go back and add more color to. So it's not just leaving it, blank, but it's leaving it blank until you can add more color, okay? So frisket works in multiple ways like that. Now you can see now how it kind of looks like in some of these areas we have these white blotches, and that's fine. You can keep it that way, or you can go back now and very lightly add a little more color in these areas, kind of filling it out a little bit more, and by doing so you have the area to work with. So sometimes artists talk about with watercolor, it's a great medium, but once you start to actually fill up all this space, especially if you're working in small scale like we are here with their little fence posts and little trees and things, but it's a great medium to use, and it's a great tool to use with this medium if you're interested in having that negative space that you can now go back and work with a little more. So now what you would do is on each one of these, after you finish it and it's where you want it, put your initial maybe at the bottom of each one. And this is something you can make copies of now and mail out to your friends and family. It's just something neat to do, personalizes things for the holidays. Notice I didn't take too much time, and also notice the color. These are all winter scenes, but here you have purples. You have blues. Up here you have more darker blues and greens. Here you have yellow and green. And over here a mixture of a little bit of all of it. Green, yellow, blue, a little bit of purple. These are all colors that appear in winter. But when you think of winter, you think only of white snow, right? A lot of us do. Also shadows in the contours of the shapes of your geography will also add shadows, which will give us color. Don't just put gray. There's a lot of color even in winter, if you know where to look and how to look at your surroundings. Art is everywhere, and it's just your interpretation of your own environment. And if we wanted to, we can make these psychedelic colors even. It doesn't matter. Art is open to whatever it is you want to do as the creator of your work. So thank you again for tuning in. We really appreciate you here on Pike TV. We'd like for you to send in your work, please. If you have any examples of your art you'd like to share with us, we'd love to see it. Also, if you have any questions, please send those in too. You can email me at eplingillustrations@gmail.com. And try to stay warm. And while you're having a little more time inside, maybe staying out of all those elements, grab some paper and some pen. Heck, grab some watercolor too and see what you can come up with. Be sure to send it to us when you do though. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, keep drawing. I'm Christopher Epling.